Gotland, 1361. For the inhabitants of the Swedish Isle in the Baltic Sea, everything is about to change. Under the burning July sun, the Gotlanders stand together as one to defend their homes. Invaders are coming, and they'll destroy everything in their way. The Gotlanders must stop them or die trying. For over 600 years, no one knew for sure what happened that day. Now, archaeologists are uncovering evidence of a desperate battle in the marshes at a place called Masterby.
Having seen their fathers and sons and so on died, everyone panicked and fled.
A medieval battle, it's a fight for your life. If you're on the losing side, you're more than likely going to die, and you're going to die a horrible death.
The defenders of Masterby stood alone. The medieval world, the 5th to the 15th century. A team of archaeologists investigates medieval life by exploring the world of the medieval dead.
We have a classic view of the storybook medieval life. We don't hear the stories about the common man trying to keep his family alive.
In our stores there are hundreds, if not thousands, of skeletons.
Archaeologically speaking, we can now focus in on the medieval dead people.
You're looking for clues in the skeleton all the time.
And you couldn't help almost look through their eyes thinking, what did they see? How did they die?
They came to the land at Chronicle, where the people fought against them, but they were superior. Then they gathered again and fought at Masterby. The second day, a third battle was fought, and the Gotland militia defeated, the others taken prisoner. They let a stone cross be raised for commemoration. The words of the Gotland Chronicle in 1633. The landscape of Gotland hides a violent past. Some of it historians know about, back to the Viking Age, yet much of it they can only glimpse. For medieval Gotland, the year 1361 echoes as a time of terrible upheaval. 10 miles south of the Gotlandic capital Visby, Masterby sits amid the reclaimed farmland and dense forest. In 1361, it lay directly in the path of a marauding invasion force, hell-bent on the looting and burning of all they encountered. There's no contemporary source that tells of what happened at Masterby. What we know comes from the Chronicle of Visby in the 17th century. Drawn by the island's reputation as a rich trading place, King Valdemar II of Denmark launched an invasion. His main target was the island's capital, the wealthy trading port of Visby. With its strong walls, it was the envy of all Sweden's rivals in the Baltic. In July 1361, Valdemar's army landed on Gotland's west coast and began its march on Visby, destroying and pillaging every Gotlander farm and village on the way. The Visbians, many of whom were foreign merchants, barred their gates to the indigenous farmers and villagers. So for the Gotlanders in villages like Masterby, right in the path of the advancing Danes, all they could do was band together in a hastily formed militia and try to hold out. They fought a battle somewhere in the marshes south of Masterby, astride the main road. But the Danish army Professional soldiers, better equipped and more experienced, broke through and pillaged their way to Visby. They defeated what remained of the Gotland militia in a one-sided final battle. It was a cataclysm. Gotland never recovered. Overnight, its medieval golden age was finished. Times of dramatic change like this form cornerstones in history.
It's really good evidence for a massive change on Gotland at that time. There was an invading force being repelled or attempted to be repelled by the locals, by the islanders themselves, and of course they failed. Of course, everything changes from that moment onwards.
For archaeologists like Tim Sutherland, Gotland's story is well known. Early in the 20th century, mass graves from Visby were discovered. Hundreds of skeletons and many artifacts and armour betrayed the true scale and horror of 1361. Yet this was just from Visby. For more than 6 centuries, almost nothing was known about the other battles the Gotlanders fought for their island, including the one at Masterby. In 2012, Tim carried out an archaeological survey of the Visby graves, partially excavated more than 70 years ago. It's one of the most important sites in medieval archaeology. Yet it's now heavily developed, and there's currently little scope for more archaeology there. But there is new work being done elsewhere on Gotland by a team of Swedish archaeologists.
So the chance has arisen whereby there is a potential for finding something on the same island from the same period, killed by the same people, and these other people potentially lie in the ground somewhere outside Visby. And the locals have initiated an archaeological project whereby they've started to look for a medieval battlefield, and they found it. Almost unbelievably, they found evidence of it. They found crossbow bolts and bits of sword and weapons.
Finding evidence of lost medieval battles is extremely difficult. Tim knows because he's tried. He's one of the world's foremost battlefield archaeologists and made his name excavating mass graves from the Battle of Towton in England. For this reason, he knows what's been done at Masterby is very important. So he and metal detectorist Simon Richardson are on their way to Gotland, where they'll lend their expertise to the ongoing project. Their work at Towton was made easier because it was a recognised historic battlefield, its location well documented. For many long years, Masterby, though, was a lost battlefield, with no contemporary records and only the oral tradition of the locals to keep its memory alive. Yet there is one other clue as to what happened there.
Standing not far away from where they found all these fragments of medieval conflict, there is a very large standing stone cross, and this has all sorts of stories associated with it.
The Masterby Cross stands alone in the fields, a few metres from the road just outside the modern village. It's one of the things that's hooked him into the project. No one knows for sure how long it's stood, nor even why in fact it's there, adding to the intrigue.
The cross has been moved. It used to lie down. It's been moved from a great distance away. It's been moved from a short distance away. My instinct would tell me that you do not move large stone crosses like that unless there's a very good reason, in which case it might have fallen over, in which case somebody might have just put it back up again. But there's a very good chance that the area around that stone cross contains the graves of the people that died in the Battle of Masterby in 1361, just before the Battle of Visby. So there is almost a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of finding a parallel to something like Visby, which would be phenomenal. We've potentially got evidence for another mass grave or another series of mass graves down the road at Masterby. And so are there parallels? Are they completely different, or are they exactly the same? and we don't know. And that's one of the interesting things that we'd like to find out.
The project centres around the present-day village of Masterby. Gotland is known for its many medieval churches, many of which date to long before 1361. Somewhere near the church stood the medieval settlement, but no traces remain on the surface. It's an almost entirely local team. Most are amateurs, with some professional archaeologists. They all know the stories of the Gotlanders' battle here, and for the last few years, they've been committed to keeping its memory alive. Maria Lingström is the project leader. She's a professional archaeologist and was born and raised in Masterby, and so has a strong personal affinity with the story. She wants to find out the real facts to back up what she learned as a child about the people who gave everything to defend the village more than 600 years ago. The first thing they had to do was to verify there was any kind of medieval activity there at all. Each year, they run a metal detecting survey to cover a different area of the grid. Slowly, they're gaining an insight into what happened here in 1361. The most important thing is to trace the actual outline of the battle area, piece by piece, grid by grid. The finds are scattered through the fields, lying for the most part right where they fell in the ground, dropped by a fleeing defender or an advancing invader. Now, more than 600 years later, fellow Gotlanders search for this evidence of their forebears. Simon Richardson's experience helps with this. He's one of the most experienced battlefield metal detectorists in the world. While Simon heads out into the fields with the metal detecting team, Tim prepares for a different kind of survey at the Masterby Cross. He's joined by Helen Goodchild from the University of York in England. She'll help Tim carry out a remote sensing survey around the area of the cross. The site of the Visby graves was marked by a similar stone cross. No one knows whether there are burials at Masterby.
Well, we know we've got a medieval battle. We've got the evidence of that, so that's one thing. We know that in a medieval battle, lots of people get killed, so somewhere there would be lots of dead, presumably. Now, either everybody's been taken out of the landscape and there are no mass graves, or somewhere in this landscape there will be mass graves. Therefore, you look for points of reference, and there's no better point of reference than this huge, big slab of limestone. And if we want to look for a parallel for something like this cross here, there is no better example than a few miles up the road at Visby, where we know there is a very, very similar cross of the same sort of size and dimensions, and that does mark the medieval mass graves from the Battle of Visby. We're hoping that in this landscape, within this very field itself, right close to the cross, are the mass graves from the people that died at the Battle of Masterby. We also know that towards the end of the Battle of Masterby, it appears as though the battle went through or very close by the medieval settlement around Masterby. So we'll have evidence of where they lived, we'll have evidence of where they fought, we'll have evidence of where they died, and also, hopefully, we'll have evidence of where they were eventually buried.
Tim and Helen are using a range of techniques to try and detect any graves that might be here. But much depends on the geology, or even the remains of the medieval buildings.
The problem is graves are always really quite hard to pick up, regardless of the techniques used. I mean, it depends what's in the grave. If they're buried with their armour, then we'd expect it to be hugely magnetic. It'll just be a giant anomaly. But if they haven't been, it might be more difficult to detect. And in fact, it might be that the later settlement is going to obliterate any traces of that at all. So, I mean, we've already found that we're picking up what look like walls and stuff from perhaps a later farmhouse. So, if we're lucky, we'll see the grave as well. If we're unlucky, we'll get a lot of post-medieval structures.
Ground-penetrating radar will enable them to look for large shapes or displacements up to several meters down into the soil.
If you imagine a radar in something like a plane or a ship, and it sends a signal out, it's the reflection of that signal off another plane or a piece of land or something, and the ship gets back. So it's a reflected signal that it's recording, and that's what we're doing. So we're sending a signal into the ground, it reflects off something or multiple somethings, and then gets reflected back to the recorder.
As they carry out the survey, Tim also lets his instinct as an archaeologist build an idea of what could have happened here immediately after the fighting. From his experience at other medieval battle sites, he's identified a pattern of events.
The primary event after the battle itself is that the nearby locals will come and collect their dead. So the members of the family, the wives and the daughters, would come into the landscape and try to identify members of the family and take them away. And then of course you get people coming from further afield who have to do exactly the same thing all over Gotland. They will try to come and identify their family members and hopefully take them away as well. Also you've got people on the battlefield scrounging, looking for items of value. There's lots of activity, and then eventually you are left with a battlefield full of dead that nobody's claimed. And then somebody, sooner or later, will come along, a member of the church, a member of the local aristocracy, and say, right, we'll clear the battlefield. And so anybody that is left will presumably be placed in the mass graves just to clear up. So either the mass graves would be somewhere like a churchyard if there's a very small number of them, or it could be, if there are a large number, they've been in an open piece of landscape where there's a piece of ground that's not under agriculture.
At the Gotland's Museum in Visby, Tim and Simon get an idea of the kind of evidence so far discovered from 1361. This is just a small selection of a huge range of artefacts, including armour, weaponry, and human bones. One type of artefact is dominant among the finds made by the Masterby project so far: crossbow bolts. So far, many have been found, probably shot at Gotlanders by the invaders. Valdemar's army is known to have included German mercenaries, possibly some of whom were crossbowmen. The crossbow was a weapon feared on the medieval battlefield. It required less skill and strength to use than a longbow, and so was seen as a devilish, unfair device. A medieval terror weapon, ideal to break a lightly equipped militia like the Gotlanders and drive them back in panic.
This glass case contains essentially the Masterby collection, and if you can see, these are the classic crossbow bolts, and the second back from the right there is the classic short, stubby but heavy crossbow bolt, and this is from the battlefield at Masterby. So you brought one with you. So essentially it's the same size, shape and weight, because it's not a little bodkin, it's not a very narrow, slender artefact, is it? It's a big, heavy, serious piece of kit. But this is a Masterby collection, so this has come off the Masterby battlefield. Yeah. So basically these are crossbow bolts, there's no denying that, is there?
Yeah, I mean they're all the standard form, aren't they? But just vary in size.
So that's important because we're getting continuity now between what is essentially being used across Europe at that time, and we've got them on the Masterby battlefield and we've got them on the Visby battlefield. So it's all the standard kit around that time. It's a short, stubby head as well. It's not a long, slender, like a bodkin arrowhead. So if it hit you in a piece of flesh, obviously you'd survive, but if that hit you in the face or in the head, it would take you down and you wouldn't bother getting up again.
Tim and Simon head out into the field to help with the survey. They soon find it's not a straightforward place to metal detect.
It's going really well. It's hard work. There's so many nails. Literally pounds and pounds of them in weight. So yeah, you're on your knees every 5 minutes and digging. But everything has to be investigated, so you could leave what you think's a nail and it could be a chainmail link or a fragment of something else. No, it's just a process of elimination. It's a surprise. Yet another nail.
The many nails are a hindrance to the metal detecting team. Scrap from more recent eras is a problem on most historical sites, especially on fields used for agriculture for hundreds of years.
This is the kind of thing, well, this is the stuff we've been finding on the battlefield. Mainly made up of nails and wire. But there is the odd item, which is a fair bigger. A lot of agricultural stuff. Got a piece of wire. Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating finding this sort of thing, but it's what you have to go through. It's part of the process. You have to remove these items to find, the battle-related things. Yeah, I mean, something like this, looking at the metal, it looks quite old to start with, and maybe initially when it comes out of the ground, it could be mistaken for part of a knife. On further inspection, it's all it is it's a small adjustable spanner, quite an old one.
With all this background noise to search through, Simon needs more than his technical ability. Decades of detecting on medieval battlefields means he too has a strong instinct for where to look.
When you're doing these surveys, when you are walking around, you try and imagine the flow of the battle, where the most advantageous place would be to stand your army. And they knew where they were going to attack from. They knew how they could maybe, by looking at the landscape, how they could encircle the enemy, trap them, push them into a narrow place between two woods or into a marsh or against a river. They try and use the landscape to their advantage by looking at it, and I suppose metal detecting is the same really. You look for the higher ground where people would make escape from, away from the rivers, away from the marsh. People maybe made escape plans, I know I would. Yeah, I mean the buildings on this landscape 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and previous to that, and obviously there's no traces of them.
Yeah. So they pull the buildings down. So there's just thousands of nails everywhere, aren't there? Yeah. And they're literally just spread absolutely everywhere.
Literally everywhere.
Yeah. And they're not just one or two. There are literally
thousands,
tens of thousands of these things.
I mean, in a week, I bet I found close to 1,000.
Yeah. You know, the more bolts, the more distinctive artifacts you can find from the battle, and then plot them. We're just getting this more and more condensed spread of the battlefield archaeology. And we can see that it is actually a battlefield. It's not just a normal piece of land.
No, but the area we're moving to in a minute, over there on the rise, that should be quite exciting.
Right, why?
Because that's on the main route, and it's on higher ground, which will have taken the people fleeing past the marsh.
So we're now in the position between the marsh and Masterby?
Yes.
Right, excellent. So hopefully we'll get even more evidence of the battle then, as people came away from the marsh and then routed towards the village itself.
When the survey switches location, the result is more finds and more crossbow bolts. They're searching directly over the path of the final retreat of the Gotlanders. Beyond them, the only thing standing between the marauding Danish army and Masterby was the farmstead at Grens, where the cross now stands.
So what sort of stuff have you been finding then?
Yeah, it's been a really good survey this year. This is what the bolts usually look like. Pretty ugly.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a crossbow bolt when you first pick it up, does it?
This is a close combat area, but we have a few bolts here as well. But the main battle area is just a couple of 100 meters away. So this was probably shot at a Gotlander fleeing for his life.
Wow, that's a good one.
That's a superb one.
Yes.
That's what you would recognise as classic crossbow bolt.
They are in different sizes, aren't they?
Yeah, they
They're
are.
not all the same size.
Yeah,
They're big ones and small ones.
Yeah.
Over the past few years, the surveys have discovered almost 50 bolts like these.
All conflict is brutal. People do get killed, and they get killed in horrible ways. In the medieval conflict, you get literally hacked to pieces, or you get these big lumps of iron, these iron crossbow bolts through your skull or through your spine or through a joint in a limb. And you can just imagine the people so frightened, so afraid, you know, these brothers and fathers and fighting together, you know, seeing the friends, the neighbours, the family killed in terrible ways, and all they really want to do is to protect their community. And you get this invading army coming in, you know, who just want to take it away, and they'll take it away in any way they can. And they're totally afraid, and all they want to do is get away, get back to their homes, which here they more than likely died defending anyway. A medieval battle, it's a fight for your life, literally. You win, your side wins and you survive, great. If you're on the losing side, you're more than likely going to die, and you're going to die a horrible death.
The bolts are a grim reminder of what must have been a terrifying experience. To be pursued across the marsh, under fire. With Simon's help though, this year's survey has uncovered many other important finds. Some of them could relate to the fight the Gotlanders put up against the Danish and mercenaries.
This is a really interesting find that we made yesterday. It looks like the pommel of a sword. This is the upper part of the sword.
These fragments are extremely rare, and further evidence of the medieval battle which unfolded across these fields.
Here you have the crossguard and the rest of the sword down here. In all, I think this is a second pommel we have. I think most of the swords were taken away by the survivors, so it's really rare to find swords like this. And here we have a buckle. I think it fits in perfectly with a picture of 1361.
There are quite a few parallels of that from the Visby graves.
Yes.
But it's quite a broad one, it's quite a broad belt.
Yeah.
For a heavy belt, is it maybe a sword belt?
Yeah, it could be a sword belt or something, yeah.
There are also pieces of armour, again extremely rare to find in situ on a battle site.
This is a really promising find as well. Might be a lamella. See the holes here.
Lamella armour was formed of many overlapping iron scales, or lames. It was a style that dated back to Viking times on Gotland.
Well, lamellar armour is armour that is made up of small plates. So what you would do is you would have a series of these next to each other, overlapping each other, all riveted or tied onto something else, and it forms it's almost like a suit of mail, except it's made of plates instead of little tiny rings. So the fact that this has got little holes in it suggests that it might be actually part of an armour.
Complete examples were buried on bodies in the Visby graves. But here at Masterby, the finds are evidence of the armour's use in battle.
And again, some of these, looking at the Visby examples, you can almost imagine that potentially being shield-shaped. And some of the armour actually has copper alloy designs on the armour itself. So some of these might not even have just been plain, they might have been decorated as well.
Tim heads back to the cross. With the radar survey complete, he and Helen use another means of inquiry to try and unlock its secrets.
We were told by the locals that there was no inscription on the stone. And so I thought that was quite unusual for quite an elaborate cross like this, and also considering that it's so similar to the cross at Visby, which has got a very elaborate and ornate inscription. And so when we came up here, as you can see, the lichen covers it so well and disguises it. It's just so camouflaged, you just can't see any indentations on the cross. One of the questions one has to ask is, why is a big cross of this stature standing in the middle of a field in what seems to be a completely agricultural landscape? Automatically, questions spring to mind. Is it related to the battle, and if so, is it the memorial cross of the mass graves that possibly lie underneath it? Or is it just a memorial to the battle itself and the people who died here? It is possible that underneath and around this cross are the graves of the people who defended this landscape in 1361.
It's possible they might be able to see inscriptions that still remain on the surface of the stone, not visible during daylight hours. All they have to do is wait for darkness.
The idea is that we're going to shine a raking light across the surface of the stone. And the reason behind that is that by using a very low light against the surface, it will cast very deep and recognisable shadows. And anything that's an undulation in the surface of the stone and that casts a shadow, we'll be able to record. If we shine it from there, and then what we can do is turn it.
Oh, look at that.
And remember, we're only doing a quadrant at a time. You can already see all the lettering turning up. Is that an A?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's an A. There's definitely a D there.
Yes. Hello.
Is that an O? So is that Dominus? Domini? I know Domini.
Yes.
See, that's what we think it might say then.
Wow.
And then of course we've got some down here which is incredibly deep already. Whoops.
You just read inscribed letters that haven't been read out loud for about 700 years.
Potentially, yeah.
Amazingly, the inscriptions can be made out after centuries, despite the weathering on the cross, out in the open, exposed to the elements.
Every single year you get a fraction of a millimetre disappearing because of frost action. So the water will soak into the surface, then it'll freeze, and the surface will just fall off. But it's minute because it's really hard stone. But over the centuries, what was presumably a deep inscription is almost gone. And so hopefully we're recording it in time, but some elements of it have almost certainly already gone.
The letters are very faint and difficult to decipher. They're a kind of script used across Scandinavia and Europe during the later Middle Ages.
We are exposing what are almost certainly letters, but some of them are such an odd shape to our modern eye that we have to find a reference to what that letter is. Now, these letters appear to be in the form what they call black letter, which is a very uniform shape. But what we need to do is to compare known black letters to what these letters are on the inscription. And so we will find some that are nothing like similar. And then we'll find some that are exact replicas, like the letter D. We know that is a black letter, letter D.
Yes, I think these dots separate two words. So we have the last letter here, and then the other word starts with an O or a D.
That's not a black letter D though. This is a typical black letter D.
Yeah. Then it's an O.
With a tail on, so it would have to have a tail.
Okay, so it's an O then.
So it's an O or something similar.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's very rounded for a black letter. So it may be that somebody's even cleaned it up again. These two are incredibly deep.
They are really deep.
It's either that or it's just for some reason it's very hard around there. It's not eroded. But we've got such a good letter there.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
There, isn't it? That's just.
Yes. But it's a minuscule, or what do you say? It's a small A.
Yes.
Although it's in the beginning. Yes.
Type, yeah.
Yes.
For Maria Lindström, it's an important discovery. She's known about the cross since childhood, growing up in Masterby. But she never realised it still bore these hidden inscriptions.
Really excited, yes.
Considering it didn't supposed to have an inscription on it anyway, this is absolutely fantastic.
Yes.
So we now know that it once had a full inscription, and it's just worn away.
I was born here, so I've seen it all my life, and I've always been told that the cross was blind, and that's why we haven't
blank.
Blank.
So there's no inscription on it. So you were always told from a very early age that this was a blank cross.
Yes.
And now, how do you feel about seeing this for the first time?
Oh, this is amazing. This is
so
dream coming true, really.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Part of the inscription seems to be Jacobi, which may refer to St. James's Day, just prior to when the Battle of Visby is known to have taken place. It could just be coincidence.
So the cross in Visby has got an inscription that's got the date of their
Yes.
battle on it.
Yes.
And that was, what date was that?
3 days after, I think, Jacobi, then it must be, since it's the 27th
27th.
of July.
So if this has got Jacobi written on it, which is St James's Day, then that would refer to a medieval Saints' Day, which very coincidentally just happens to coincide with the date of the Battle of Masterby, which is fantastic. So it does look as though we've got a medieval cross with an inscription on it, which we didn't know existed, and the inscription might just say Jacobi on it for James, St James's Day, which is the date of the Battle of Masterby. That'd be unbelievable to discover that for the first time.
Out in the fields, Maria and the metal detecting team are back at work. They're on the northwestern shore of what was the shallow lake in medieval times. It's the area across which the defenders fled after they failed to stop the Danish advance.
We're actually on the shore of the lake now. You can see it dipping down a bit over here. And there we have the former lake. It was ditched out at the end of the 19th century.
So it's not a deep lake then, it's a shallow...
Shallow, yes.
Yeah.
And 1361 is supposed to have been a really dry and hot summer, so it was even shallower.
But the marshy lake bed wasn't enough to stop the Danish advance.
The Gotlanders knew if the Danes came over the lake, the battle would be...
That's it would be over.
Yes.
Lost, yeah.
So the Gotlanders tried to hinder the Danes on the lake, and that's why we have both crossbow bolts there, and also parts of swords, parts of spike clubs and so on.
So that was a defensive position.
Yeah.
They tried to prevent them from crossing that lake.
Yeah.
And they failed, obviously.
Yeah.
In the great scheme of things, this is now becoming almost parallel to the archaeological evidence from the graves at Visby. But it wasn't a proven battlefield until relatively recently.
No, not amongst the experts. They said, no, historians said, we don't think there was a battle. But the people here in Masterby have never doubted there was a battle here. So.
And so what's happening now is the battlefield archaeology is formalising this part of history. And of course now you can rubber stamp it and say there is definite proof of medieval battlefield in this landscape.
The weather closes in as this year's survey is almost complete. Just beyond where the team have been working, the land shelves down to where the heaviest part of the fighting probably was. The close combat area. The two sides more than likely met in the narrow part of the shallow lake, as the Danish and mercenaries forced a crossing to outflank the Gotlanders.
Yes, we think that the Gotlanders had a gathering point here on the northern shore of the lake, and that they met the Danish army actually on the lake, on this narrowest part. So there were two lines shooting with their crossbows and shooting arrows at each other. And then we have a close combat in that area as well. And then we have the close combat area here when the people are fleeing. There is a written source from the 17th century which mentions that there were two battles fought upon the lake 2 days in a row, but I'm not sure the Gotlanders could stand up for that long. They would have been in family groups standing next to their fathers and brothers and sons and so on. And when they scattered, they probably fled in these family groups as well. Having seen their fathers and sons and so on died, everyone panicked and fled.
How many battlefields now?
How many? Too many to count. About my fourth medieval battlefield. Probably one of the most interesting.
As the team head out of the field for the final time this year, they're following the route the Gotlanders probably took as the survivors fled back to the village. Tim has seen the signs of this kind of panicked rout before, on other sites, other battlefields.
Obviously, where things aren't is almost as important as where things are, because then you know the shape of the battlefield itself. And there's usually a big block, a mass of artifacts, and then it usually tails off in one direction, you know, either north, south, east or west or whatever. And eventually it just fades away into nothingness as the people ran away and were either they escaped or they were killed.
At the cross, the radar results are inconclusive. There are no obvious grave pits in the fields around the cross. But there are the possible remains of the medieval farmstead that stood here at the time of the battle. Tim and Simon return one last time to take auger samples from the areas highlighted by the radar results.
We're augering mainly to look at the subsurface structure of the soil. So we're looking for how deep the topsoil is, and then what the subsoil is made of and how deep it is.
That's clean, isn't it?
Everybody's telling us that there's nothing here, and until you can prove it, then you just never know.
The Masterby cross binds its secrets tightly. This is where the debris trail of artifacts seems to lead. Perhaps the final rallying place of the defenders of Masterby before they were overwhelmed. Tim and Simon try to picture the final moment. And where, if anywhere near here, the bodies of the fallen Gotlanders lie.
The location here is at the end of this tail of archaeological evidence of the battle. So we're getting crossbow bolts, we're getting bits of armour and all sorts of things. And this is, to all intents and purposes, the tail end of it. So if we've got the mass of the battlefield there, one would expect the majority of the people to be buried there, at least temporarily, and then taken to the church later on. But if there was a settlement here and this is part of the route, then is it possible that this is where people were fleeing to? And then there was like a horrible situation occurred here that was memorialised not just for the battle but for the for the carnage that took place.
Most of the artefacts are in what we believe to be the centre of the battlefield.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't move a large number of dead people from there to a spot like this,
No.
which is a few hundred metres from the church. If you're going to all the effort, all the trouble to move them from there, which is a lot of labour, you carry on to the church and bury them in the cemetery.
Yeah. So why is this memorial stone here?
Maybe this memorial is just commemorating. This is the area of the old village. This is where maybe the last stand was. So we'll put the cross here. It doesn't necessarily mean they're buried here.
Yeah.
It just means where everything sort of ended.
You know, this could be the beginning of the route where they just start fleeing back towards Visby, and the locals obviously get caught up in it.
Yeah.
So it might mark the transition point. Did they actually exhume the graves from the battlefield and take them into the consecrated ground, or are they still there on the battlefield waiting for us to find them?
Oh, there are several graves between here and the main concentration.
Yeah. And again.
And as for the Danes, the enemy, would they go to much trouble to bury those? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so, because they'd be too busy going towards. They hadn't reached their objective yet. Their objective was Visby.
I mean, if the local population's wiped out, there aren't going to be many people around.
Exactly, all this landscape would have been decimated, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
At the time of the battle, because there would have been thousands of troops moving through this landscape, taking anything that was movable, anything of any value whatsoever. That's the food, the livestock, any of the artefacts in the houses. They'd probably loot, burn the houses, and then move on.
And there are a few knives found there, and we're talking one, this size.
Yeah.
That'd be a good piece of, a useful piece of equipment.
Yeah,
for a labourer or for a farmer.
If somebody had found that, they would have had it.
But I don't think people have gone to the trouble of looking. Maybe a lot of them don't come back because they're dead.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whatever happened here in the hours and days following the battle, the walled city of Visby capitulated soon after. And with it, the whole of the island fell to Valdemar and the Danes. Though it was regained by Sweden years later, medieval Gotland was never the same again. Like their brothers in arms who filled the grave pits outside Visby, somewhere in this landscape, so far undiscovered, lie the defenders of Masterby.